Thank you.
And then it'll just be half a second, hopefully.
Okay, great. How are you, Megan?
Tired. We finished our interviews finally yesterday.
Oh.
We did, I think, 13 yesterday or something. So it
Wow,
was a big day.
that's a lot. But I'm so excited we got so many candidates.
Yes. It's a good problem.
Right?
And thank you for interviewing them all.
Looks like we're ready to go. Everything's on.
Excellent. Then I will call to order this meeting of the Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization. And we will go around for, we had a nice long time at our last meeting for introductions. So I think today we can just do a quick roll call. Phil Chang, see you're here.
Mr. Chang here.
Excellent. And Megan Perkins.
I am present.
Excellent. We understand that Rita Schenkelberg will not be with us today. Bob Townsend. Okay.
Present.
Excellent. And that is the members of the policy board staff.
Yeah, so I'll just list off the others that are in our meeting today. So MPO staff, we've got Tyler Dickey, manager, Andrea Napoli, senior planner, myself, Hobie Anderson, program coordinator. We've also got Cameron Prow. She's from Typewrite 2, does our minutes. And then city staff, I've got Chris Taylor, Eric, I've lost you, Eric. Eric Baird, there you are, sorry. Kimala Levinson, I always say her name wrong, and then Tracy Stabler. Those are all from City of Bend Finance team. And they're gonna have an agenda item on here and then probably pop off. The other three I've got so far our visitors are Donald Moore, Robin Vora, David Amiton from ODOT. And shortly, I assume we're gonna have David Abbas. I just sent him the message. And then Cameron has her hand raised, but I don't see anything. I don't think, can you talk now, Cameron? No. Okay, well, we'll work on that on the other end. So that is everyone we've got at this point.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Welcome, everybody. And the next are the virtual meeting guidelines.
Okay, and I can take that over as well.
Thanks.
So the chart that, or the screen that we're showing has a chat function, which was disabled. In the future, we can add that back in if we need it for MPO meetings, but the City of Bend has asked to not have chat on theirs. So we were just aligning with that. You can raise your hand and you should be able to see your raise hand function down below now instead of hiding off into the corner. So that's a little easier, at least for that. If you ever call in, you can always use *9 as well to raise your hand and we'll be able to call on you. And if there's any issues, please send me an email. I'll be checking those as well. It's janderson@bendoregon.gov. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Hovie. And
Thank you.
I will just say especially to all of our members, please just unmute yourselves and speak up if we don't catch that your hand is raised for any issue.
Yes,
the next
please.
item agenda is public comment. And I think Hobie is going to help me with that one as well. Hobie, do you see anyone there for public comment?
We have a couple visitors, but I don't see anybody with a raised hand, or if anybody has a comment, go ahead and speak up now. There'll be another opportunity at the end of the meeting as well. Seeing none, I think you're okay to go to item number 4.
All right. So item number 4 is election of the chair and vice chair. The policy board bylaws state that the policy board shall elect the chair and vice chair at the second meeting of the calendar year to serve for that year. So with that in mind, I would be happy to take any nominations for chair of the MPO.
I nominate Councillor Campbell for chair of the MPO.
Thank you, Ms. Perkins. Anybody else interested in being chair? I will say that I would be happy to serve as chair. Shall we go ahead and vote on that, please? All those in favor of myself as chair for 2021, please raise your hands.
Aye.
For the record, on the video, I had Phil, Megan, and Bob Townsend all raise their hand.
Excellent. And then I guess I'll go ahead and raise my own hand as well. So
Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate that. We also will need a vice chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair for 2021?
If she's willing to serve, I would nominate Councillor Perkins for vice chair.
I will second that nomination. Any other nominations for vice chair? Let's go ahead and go hand raise again, please. All those in favor of Councillor Megan Perkins as our vice chair, please raise your hands. Excellent. Excellent.
Again, for the record, I just wanted to say Bob Townsend, Megan Perkins, Phil Chang, Barb Campbell all raised their hand.
Thank you, Hopi.
Mhm.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure Cameron does as well. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your confidence. And Megan, thank you for volunteering to serve. We do appreciate it. The next item, item 5, is our annual financial report presentation. I'll go ahead and turn that over to staff.
All right, we have
Hey.
Eric. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Eric.
Tyler. Sorry.
No, I was just going to introduce you. So Eric Baird from the city of Bend will give this update and overview of the MPO's annual financial report. So go ahead, Eric.
You bet. Thank you all for inviting us here today. As Tyler mentioned, my name is Eric Baird. I'm the accounting and reporting manager. With us also is Tracy Stabler and Kimla Levison from the accounting team. Tracy is the assistant finance director and Kimla is a financial accountant. I was here last year as well when I presented this. So just wanted to kind of give some overview comments and then some specific discussion points about the financials. I saw in the agenda items that you have a link to the financials on the website. And so our auditors finished up the audit in December of 2020, and they presented to the City of Bend City Council on February 3rd. And they had 5 minutes to present that entire thing. So if I take more than that, then I'm doing something wrong, I think. But the overall comment of that is we had an unmodified, or what's called a clean opinion from that. That's the highest rating that we can get. So financials are presented fairly in accordance with GAAP, which is a generally accepted accounting principles. And the MPO financials were a part of that audit. And kind of the other comment we like to say is there were no deficiencies that were found during that audit. As a reminder, when you're reviewing the financials for the MPO, you operate on a cost reimbursement basis. So you're intended not really to have a fund balance. And you'll see that in the financial statements that are presented. So that's just kind of one thing to keep in mind as we talk about items. And then I guess we should just kind of mention it too. There is a statement in the financials about COVID, and that for fiscal 20, there were really no impact from COVID on your operations. That's something obviously the City of Bend and the MPO is continually looking at, but as of fiscal 20, there was no impact to your operations or funding. Your financial statements are broken down into different components. So you've got the management discussion and analysis, and that's also called the MD&A. That's pages 4 through 7 of your financial report. You've got the basic financial statements, which includes the notes to the financial statements. So the financial statements are on pages 8 to 11, and then pages 12 to 14 on the notes. And then you have what's called a required supplemental information, which is your budget. Basically, it's kind of looking at the budgetary side, and those kind of all roll into the basic financial statements, but they give you a different lens of kind of where you are operating. Overall, MPOs, I know it's not a simple organization to operate, but when you look at the financials, you operate basically in one fund. So it's kind of a simple financial statement that kind of rolls together. I guess overall, the financial highlights, I would say your assets ended at about 89,000. That's down from about 24,000 the prior year. But you'll notice that your liabilities are also down by about 24,000, exactly 24,000. So your assets and liabilities offset one another to give you that zero fund balance. So that is timing of liabilities, timing of collections. So right now, if you think about the MPO on that cost reimbursement, majority of your funding comes from ODOT. And right now, that's about a 2-month lag of the monthly operations by the time we bill out and then receive a reimbursement is about 2 months. So you'll see on the financial statements that there's a receivable on the books for those basically 2 months of operations that we're waiting for that reimbursement to come from ODOT. And that presents a cash flow kind of issue at year end. So at year end, the City of Bend gives an operating loan, an overnight loan, just to cover that negative cash for just waiting for those reimbursements. And that gets paid back the beginning of the next year. And you'll see that $57,000 loan kind of on, if you look at the budget to actual statements on page 15, you'll see that income coming in. And that is a liability that is sitting on the books to repay. Your revenues and expenditures, again, offset one another. So they were up about 72,000 from the prior year. And that's due to just, I think, timing of when operations are happening. So as you expand, you'll see that revenue coming in to cover that expenditure. But I'd leave that up to kind of Tyler and Hobie to talk about the operations. And but in the financial statements, you'll see in the MD&A and also in the notes, kind of a discussion about operations for our current year, which is fiscal 21. So you'll see of what the plan for operations is, and I believe it looked to be about the same. So I think overall expenditures planned for fiscal 21 is about the same as what happened in fiscal 20. The one item I'd like to note too is that if you look at the financial statements on page 8, which is your statement of net position, you do have a segment for unearned revenue. And what that basically is when we get reimbursements from ODOT to cover operations, we have certain things that are not directly reimbursed. So you pay for finance and IT and HR services, and that's considered indirect. And so there's a percentage that's used to pay that back. And so through fiscal 20, that portion that we were using for the percentage was a little over than what your actual expenditures are. So we've worked with ODOT this year, and we have an adjusted indirect cost allocation rate that is less than what we've been reimbursed. That should eat up most of that. So we basically present that as unearned revenue because it's funding that we've collected, but we really haven't earned it tied to the expenditures. So that's the only kind of item that I'd like to point out, just as you're reading through it, that is going to trend down to zero. It's never going to be exactly zero, but it'll trend down to zero in fiscal 21. And overall, those were my comments. And I'd invite Tracy Stabler to kind of jump in if she has any comments, or definitely open to questions. And that's one item I'd like to mention also to this policy board, is that we're always available for questions as you're looking for through your monthly financials or any transactions, or reviewing our financial statements. I'd also like to say that if you look at the November 3rd council presentation on the web for Moss Adams, that's our auditor, they have their presentation up there of what they presented to the city council. So that's also available for you as well. And I know I went through a lot of information quickly, but I know time is precious these days. So open to questions, and I think that kind of brings me to the end of my comments.
Thank you, Eric. No comments, it looks like, through our group, but I do want to say thank you to Eric. I appreciate him and his team working through all of our budget through the year, and invoicing ODOT and streamlining our processes. So there will be more coming up as we talk about our budget committee and that sort of thing as well too. So
Thanks, Hobie.
please,
Yeah,
as you review, comment.
Yeah, I think we've created a good working relationship kind of across the board. And I also wanted to mention too, working with Moss Adams, we view that as not just them coming in and kind of looking into our operations to try to find things that are bad. We really use them as a partner, and it's actually a very good partnership.
Yes.
Barb, I think you're
Oh,
on.
Barb. Let me get it. Almost.
I was just also saying thank you and congratulations on a clean financial report. You just do excellent work for us, and we appreciate that.
Thanks so much. And I know I'm the face today of the finance team, but it takes all of us to kind of complete this process.
Thank you. All right, I think that moves us on to our next item. And if I had an agenda in front of me, I would know what that is.
Yeah, it's right here. Agenda item number 6 is the meeting minutes.
Thank you. Looking for a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
I move to approve the January 19th, 2021 draft meeting minutes as presented.
Excellent. Have we got a second?
I'll second.
Excellent. We've got Phil making the motion and Bob has seconded. All in favor, please raise your hands or say aye.
Aye.
And that looks unanimous to me.
That is correct. It looks like everyone approved. Cameron's hand is up again. I just wanted to mention that we are recording this meeting, and it's also on YouTube. I didn't say that in our virtual meeting, and Cameron wanted to make sure that was confirmed.
Can you hear me?
Those are true.
Obi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Cameron.
Oh, wonderful. I just connected my improved audio system, and now I'm back in tune.
All right.
To know if the agenda that required a motion to accept the financial report, if that motion is going to be made.
Oh, thank you.
You are right. Thank
I
you,
missed that.
Cameron. So we'll go back a step, and I'm looking for a motion to accept the financial report.
I move acceptance of the 2019 to 2020 annual financial report.
I'll second.
Excellent. Phil Chang makes the motion and Bob Townsend seconded. All in favor, raise your hands or say aye, please.
Aye.
Excellent. And that is unanimous. Cameron, thank you so much. Sorry about that.
And go ahead, Cameron, if there's something else you have.
No, that takes care of my questions for the moment. You're doing very well.
Thank you.
With your help. Thank you, Cameron. All right, that moves us along to our next item. Oh, where am I? Hovey, can you?
So yeah, so Tyler, do you want to take this one? It's the MPO consortium assignments.
Yeah, Barb, this is the Oregon MPO Consortium is it's a group of the state's 8 MPOs, and it's elected officials from each of the state's MPOs. There are typically one or two the group meets 3 to 4 times a year to discuss issues of common interest among the state's MPO areas. And what we're looking for today is assigning at least one member and preferably 2 to serve as the Bend MPO representatives to that statewide MPO consortium for this current calendar year.
So for that, I think we can just accept volunteers if there are any volunteers. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Anyone interested in serving on the state's MPO consortium?
Can I ask, Tyler, those 3 to 4 meetings, are they in person or are they virtual, or will they be virtual after COVID?
Well, they were pre-COVID, they were always in-person meetings. We've been doing virtual meetings, for the last year or so. I suspect, once we start to move out of COVID, that we'll have some sort of hybrid type setup. And what we've tried to do with those meetings, that group, they move the meetings around the state typically. And so in the past, we've always, of the 4 meetings that they typically have, we usually have hosted one here in Bend. They've usually had, and then rotated them, among the other MPOs on the other side of the mountain.
I would volunteer to participate in those meetings if yeah, I'm happy to let someone else do it too, but I'd be interested in that kind of cross-state connection.
That's excellent, and I myself would volunteer as well. The meetings, it is kind of fun to go to see other folks' jurisdictions, and there's always an opportunity for a field trip to go and see projects that those other MPOs have been able to accomplish. And so it looks like it will be Phil Chang and myself on the Oregon MPO Consortium. Should we get a vote on that? I think we've got it.
I'm in favor. Yep.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate that.
Okay. Yes, thank you both.
All right, great. Item Number 8 is a budget committee appointment. Have we got staff for a background on this?
Yeah, I will, I think in your packet, there's the current roster of the budget committee. Our budget committee is comprised of the 5 policy board members plus 5 local residents. And we currently have 2 openings on that budget committee for local residents. We put out a call for applications back in, I think, early January, and that was noticed. We maintain several email lists, so it was sent out to those lists. It was posted on the City of Bend's website. And I don't know if Hobie could back me up if I missed anything, but we tried to push it out as best we could. We received 3 applications for those 2 slots. And then last week, Hobie and I met with Councilor Perkins to review those applications. And she is going to make a recommendation, I think, for 2 people, 2 of those 3 to serve to fill those 2 openings that we currently have.
That's great.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilor Perkins, have you got recommendations for us?
Yes, the 2 recommendations that we have are for Greg Bryant and Brian Potwin.
Excellent. So for those, I believe we do need a motion. Would anyone like to make a motion to appoint Greg and Brian to our budget committee?
I move that we appoint Greg Bryant and what was Mr. Potwin's first name again?
Ryan Potwin. Mhm.
Brian.
Ryan Potwin to the budget committee.
I'll second.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chang and Mr. Townsend. All in favor of those 2 budget committee members, please signify by raising your hands.
Aye.
Aye. And that looks unanimous. Thank
Correct.
you. Greg, I see that you are here. Would you like to say anything?
Am I muted or not?
Now
You're
you're
good.
on.
Yeah, well, thank you for voting me in. I'm on the TAC also. So, and I've been with you and with the MPO for a few years now. So this is just an additional thing for me to do this. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate you doing this for us, Greg. And I don't see Brian with us today, but we certainly do appreciate his applying for that position as well. That's great.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll make sure he knows.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Hobie.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And so with that, the budget committee is now whole. I'll be sending some emails out to the policy board and the budget citizen members just for some dates in March for our budget review process to begin. It's typically a 1-day meeting, 1 afternoon meeting. So it's not a big time constraint, but I'll just make sure I can get as many people as I can there.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. That puts us at number 9, the 2021-2022 work program and budget. And I believe we've got a staff presentation.
We do, and we will, with yesterday being a holiday, I think we will kind of fumble through this just a little bit. But, and I will call on Hobie and Andrea as we go through this.
Yep, we're all set.
Oops. So what is our UPWP? This is just a refresher. I mean, just because I know we have new members. It's our Unified Planning Work Program. That's our annual work program that we have to submit to the federal government. And so this goes to the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration, and it lines out all of our work items for the, for the next fiscal year, and it also includes our budget activities. A little bit of background, just as a refresher as well. Who funds us? Our primary sources are from, again, the Federal Highway Administration. They provide probably close to 80% of our funding. And then the Federal Transit Administration also provides funding to us. We also get some funding from the Oregon Department of Transportation. Those two federal funding sources require a local match, and ODOT provides the match dollars against the federal highway dollars. And then we also use in-kind contributions, which is staff time essentially, to cover the match requirement for our Federal Transit Administration funds. This table shows the annual funding from those two sources, the PL, which is the Federal Highway Administration funds, and the 5303 column, that's the Federal Transit Administration funds. So this just shows our funding history over the last 10 or 11 years. And I think a couple of things I always like to note, or have been noting for a while, is that from those two sources, we hit a peak back in 2012, in the 2012-2013 fiscal year, and then our funding either declined or kind of stayed steady up until the 1920 fiscal year. And during that time, even though the funding was stagnant, our demands on our time and resources and expectations continued to increase. And so with the prior board, we started utilizing some of the discretionary money that comes into the MPO just to help boost our staff budget. And you can see that our funding declined slightly last year, and then we are going to see a bit of a bump again this year, thankfully. Any questions so far? All right. So staffing, I think you all know there's 3 of us. Well, actually there's 2.8 of us for the MPO. We've got myself as the manager. Andrea is our senior planner. And she was hired about right at 2 years ago, I think. And when we brought her in as a part-time temporary employee. And she has been in that part-time, that 0.8 FTE status since that time. And she's been technically a part-time employee. And we are hoping through this process.
It's the limited term position.
Yeah, and so we'd like to move her from limited term, to a permanent position through this current budgeting process. And then we have Andrea, and then we have Hovey, who's our program coordinator. And you can see on the screen just some of the things, kind of the focus areas for each of us. Any questions? All right, I'll just keep moving. Current year accomplishments. We have a couple of slides here. This slide, the next slide, just talk about things that we are either working on or have completed in our current 2020 to 2021 fiscal year. I think, the second bullet there, that was a pretty lengthy process. If you recall, coming up with a process and then allocating, a percentage of our discretionary STBG funds that come in through the MPO. And then I think the other one I'd point out too is just the amount of work that Hovey has been doing over the last 2 to 3 years on the last bullet item, that non-motorized travel estimation project. That was something that she worked with ODOT research staff out of Salem on that effort. And also doing some crash analysis work with ODOT as part of that too. Andrea or Hovey, is there anything else you want to talk to on this slide?
No, I don't know if a lot of the new members know about the STBG funding that was established, that allocation. So maybe Andrea could talk about that just a little bit.
I can just give a summary of that. So over the last year, our TAC and policy board, we put together an application process for some of our federal dollars to use a portion of that. So a number of jurisdictions or organizations can apply for this funding for transportation projects that then get reviewed by the TAC and then ranked against criteria and selected for funding by the policy board. So this will be, we will do this again. Well, if we get additional funds later, we could do it sooner, but generally it'd be about every 2-3 years or so that we would do this process.
Yeah, and thank you. I'd forgotten that our new members were not part of that process because that went right up to December, I think.
Right. Did.
And so for our new members, STBG, that's Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. That's one of the core federal funding programs that's out there, that comes out through the Federal Highway Administration. And a percentage of those funds are allocated to MPOs, and then ODOT also sub-allocates a percentage of those funds that they receive to small cities and counties throughout the state. And for us, that funding for the last few years, it's been hovering around about $1 million per year. We're expecting that to start increasing a little bit going forward. And there's some talk as well that through some of the proposed federal stimulus discussions that are happening right now, there may be additional funding coming through this process. And we will know, we should have word on that, I think, by the end of March. And so if there's new funding that becomes available outside of our normal annual revenue stream, we'll be working with the TAC and policy board on, to determine how to best spend those dollars for projects within the MPO area. Any questions? All right, I will move on then. Just some of our current work in process. A couple of things I'll mention here. We did some work a couple of years ago developing transportation safety plans. We put one together for Bend, and then Deschutes County coordinated an effort to develop a safety action plan for everything outside of Bend within Deschutes County. So it was all unincorporated areas plus the other 3 incorporated communities within the county. We applied for and got funding to begin doing some implementation work on that. And it's not on what we found through that process is a lot of the safety issues are behavioral issues. It's not things that can be easily addressed with infrastructure. So it's speeding, impaired driving, distracted driving, and a number of things like that. And so we've secured some grant funding to start working on some of those soft issues, I will call them. And so we're doing that jointly with the county. And so we're going to have a county-wide implementation strategy. And we're just getting started on that project, and we'll be bringing an update to the board on that probably in the next month or two. And then the 2040, what we adopted, we have to adopt our long-range plan every 5 years. And our last time we adopted it was back in September of 2019, and that was to meet our 5-year federal requirement. Since that time, a lot of other stuff has happened. The Parkway study, it was nearly done. The technology plan was updated. The City of Bend's TSP was updated. Probably missing some other things.
Cascade East Transit.
Yes, and then CET updated their long-range plans. We need to incorporate all of those things into our plan. And so we'll be working, we want to get that done. The second bullet on there, the phase 2 of our MTP update, we would like to get that done before the end of this current fiscal year. So that's something we'll be bringing to you over the next 2 or 3 months. We can get that amendment completed. Andrea, do you want to talk to the public participation plan update process?
Sure. Yeah, so another thing that we've been working on is an update to our public participation plan. So this is something that's federally required. It hasn't been updated in quite some time. So I have been working on that. And, essentially sort of 2 main focus points for this plan update. Really, I'd like to focus on partnering opportunities. So, as an MPO with only staff of 3 doing larger public involvement efforts is a little more difficult for us. However, if we can partner, like for example, with the city, when the city updated their TSP, the MPO was updating our long-range transportation plan at the same time, and we did a joint public outreach effort that the MPO alone could not have done. So can we do that in the future? Are there other agencies that we could potentially partner with for things like this. And then also looking to start to establish relationships for organizations that represent populations we don't hear from as much. So for example, I've been setting some meetings with, about 20 different organizations in the Bend area to see where their transportation needs or barriers are for populations that they work with, and how we can provide opportunities to make sure that their voices can be heard with projects, or that the MPO reviews, things like that. So I hope to wrap that draft plan in the next month or so. So that will be coming to you a little later.
And then Hobie, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the data work that we are currently doing and will be doing?
Mm-hmm. So you may notice for the City of Bend folks, you may notice in the city manager's memo each week, there's a traffic count report. That's something that's developed by me. But the transition of that project, so all of the in the ground work is going to be transferred to streets. So I'm not going to go out and mess with the stuff on the sidewalk or the roadway anymore. But streets department and David Abbas's group with Robin Lewis are going to be working on the equipment side, and I'll be working on the data side. So we're still kind of transitioning away from my city role on that. And then just assisting with additional counts. Like every May, we do a count of coverage through the city to find out speeds and classifications and roadways, so we can see trends throughout the years. So those kind of things will be moving along, but heavily, the MPO will still heavily be involved in the data processing of local traffic data, local crash data. We just won't be on the ground as much. And then the other bullet is called a data warehousing project. It's kind of a code word for coordinating with ODOT and other jurisdictions, parks, in this data warehouse project so that we can all share data. So we're working with ODOT Region 4, Dave Hirsch does all our signal work and that sort of thing. So he's really into the data side for ODOT. And then Tyler and I are working with them and the City of Bend to see if we can find a way to share data in a really easy, more collaborative way. So those meetings are, I think, every other month, and they've been really good. We've got a lot of action items to produce and continue working through that. So we'll come back to you all as a group with some of the exciting things going on there. Tyler and ODOT staff are going to be doing a lot of transportation modeling support work as far as updating perhaps a new transportation model. So that includes a lot of data inputs that will bring our resources to that. But a lot of good things going on in the data, and I'm hoping to share all that in a much better way with you all as we progress this fiscal year, which ends in June, and then also next one, we'll develop even more tools, hopefully, with the plan. And then, Tyler, do you want to talk about ODOT partnerships a little bit?
I'll just mention, obviously the MPO, the Parkway study, Rick Williams is from ODOT is on the call with us, and he'll be talking about that after we wrap up this discussion item. But that project has been underway for over 3 years. I know Barb has been there for the whole, since the beginning, I think. And so that project is nearly done, and the MPO policy board has served as the kind of the steering committee, I guess, for that process since its inception. And then the other one that's just kicking off, it's going to be similar, is the Baker Road interchange area management plan. And we'll have our kickoff meeting with the board on that project a week from today. And so the agenda and materials for that will be coming out either later today or tomorrow. And I think there's going to be some other opportunities for partnering with ODOT, in our next, in this upcoming fiscal year.
could I ask a question?
Absolutely.
On that first bullet, the Transportation Safety Action Plan implementation. Do you work with our city police on that at all?
We will be. And I know that like when we put together the original plan, Hovey had a pretty large advisory committee that included law enforcement, folks from the DA's office, and others. And so we were reaching out way beyond our normal kind of committee members that we would typically interact with. And it's because of those behavioral issues, we're trying to push it out and try and engage, beyond our just normal, I guess, what I would call our typical transportation stakeholders. Do you have anything to add, Hovey?
No, I think there's been a lot of turnover. So we're reestablishing relationships with the traffic team in the city of Bend, and also partnering with Deschutes County sheriffs as well. So there will be more outreach coming between both of those teams.
Great. And then I had another question about data. At the city, we're trying to get travel time reliability. Is that something that's hiding there in those bullet points in the data?
That's in that super secret data warehousing project.
Aha.
So it's in there. We're sharing. It's a resource that ODOT has that we can look at travel time reliability through corridors. And it's a new tool. So we're all kind of learning about it and sharing that with the city as well. But I don't think they've dug into it quite as well yet. But it is a resource to help inform that.
Yeah, and Barb, that's something that, there's a lot of interest beyond, our local area on that measure. And so there's quite a bit of research. So there's a lot of work happening out there to try and figure out what the data needs are, and how do we actually measure it in a way that's meaningful. And so I think that's something that there's going to be more work happening over the next probably multiple years, but hopefully pretty heavily over the next year or two, so that we can start generating information that's useful for you as an elected official, as well as our residents, and trying to incorporate that into some of the planning work that we do.
And am I correct in thinking that privacy is part of that? Are we getting data from people's cell phones? Is that how we're knowing what the travel time was for a specific vehicle? Is it?
It's an average. It doesn't have any data like pieces to that, but it does come from those Bluetooth signals and that sort of thing. But it's definitely not something that we see in our access. It's a pretty big tool, and I can ask once we get something that shows some meaning behind it, because right now we can run some reports, but they just are a little obscure. So we're trying to find something that makes sense. We'll be bringing that to you.
Thank you. I find that fascinating. So thank you.
Good.
Has anybody else got any questions about this slide? Looking for hands. Doesn't look like it. All right. If you want to go ahead and continue on, thank you.
Yep. And so this is
slide, moving on to next year now, right?
What's that?
This is moving on to this next fiscal year from
so we're working on our proposed program for the 21-22 fiscal year. This slide shows some of the major tasks that we have identified in our draft work program. In our long range plan, there are some implementation actions identified in that document. So we want to make sure that we are working with our partners on starting to do those things. Andrea is going to be leading the mobility hub feasibility study, and that's the project working with the city of Bend and Cascades East Transit, looking at moving away from having a single hub at Hawthorne Station to having multiple stations or multiple hubs throughout the city. and work on that project. We're hoping we'll start, I mean, I think realistically, probably late spring or early summer, be my guess. I don't know if Andrea, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, it'll probably be. So right now we're just working on wrapping up the scope of work for that project. So I would expect that actual work starting probably, yeah, late spring, early summer.
We have identified, we haven't put anything specific. We've identified, it says assist CET with transit planning. We've put it in just kind of a placeholder in the work program. We're starting discussions with CET staff about how we could provide some level of like a little bit of staffing support for them on some planning questions that they have that pop up. For instance, one of the things that they're interested in right now is evaluating their dial-a-ride service area boundary within Bend. And so that's something that we may provide some assistance, some data, mapping and some other assistance to them on. And we want to work with them and with you, the board, going forward to see how we can provide some support to them, as they need it, as they grow and, continue to evolve within our area. ODOT projects, again, the Baker Road Interchange Area Management Plan, that's just getting started. The other one I think that I'll add in there, it's not on the slide. I don't know what role the MPO will have on it yet, but ODOT's going to be doing a corridor study for US 20, the east, I guess I'd call it the east leg. And so from 3rd Street out to the, actually past the eastern urban growth boundary. So out to the, Rick can kick in. I'm drawing a blank, out to Hamby Road. So from 3rd Street all the way out to Hamby Road intersection, doing a corridor study. And so that project will be starting, I think, probably mid to late summer. And so I think that's something that we will want to make sure that we are engaged in some way as ODOT begins work on that project. And then Andrea or Hobie, do you want to talk to anything else that's on this slide?
For the data, we kind of talked about it before. We'll just be continuing that work and developing some more data points for you all to review and expand on that process. And performance measures are another thing where our long-range transportation plan has some federal requirements, but also the city has in their TSP some performance measures. So partnering together to display those in a cool dashboard or something is on the list for next fiscal year.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add, Tyler.
Yeah. The strategic plan is just to align those plans that we update with what our partners update. So as we update our long-range transportation plan and the city of Bend updates their transportation system plan, we want those to be in alignment. So doing those every 5 years with the city is something you'll be hearing about if you haven't already from our partners in the city, like Brian Rankin, and just aligning more work like that.
All right.
That's all I had.
Yeah, so I think just on the strategic plan, I think I was just going to say this slide just shows kind of a general timeline of some of the things that we have to do. And we have a much more detailed spreadsheet that we've put together that just kind of lays out all of these things. And I think what we want to do is, as we look out 5 years, there are gaps or holes in this. When you start to lay out what the time requirements are to do these things, we have time available. And so one of the things we want to do is work with the technical committee and with you, the policy board, to identify when we know that we're going to have some time in our schedule that's, for doing things beyond what's federally required. Work with you to identify, what do you want us doing? Are there things that you want to see us tackling, when we have those holes or those gaps in our schedule, kind of on a 5-year cycle. So the next couple of slides just show the schedule. This is a little bit more detail. I'm not going to walk through all of these things, but just shows. So our work program is, we have 4 major tasks. And so our first two tasks are kind of administrative things and then short-term planning. This slide just shows kind of the schedule for those two work items or those two major work tasks. And then major plans, this is our task 3, which is kind of our long-range planning task item in the work program. And you'll see there's quite a few things on here. I don't know if Hobie or Andrea want to talk to anything on here. I just think we can kind of skip through them, but if you have anything, just feel free to interrupt.
Yeah, I think we'll be coming to those, each of those projects will come to the board.
And then our last major work task is our modeling and data analysis, which we've talked a little bit about that already. So just kind of showing, this just shows again the schedule. And so you'll see that, the schedule, there's very few gaps in this next year in terms of almost everything we do going to be working on will cover the entire fiscal year. This slide shows our draft budget summary. And Hobie, do you want to talk to anything on this slide?
No, I think just showing, this is all online as well, so you can dig into it if you want. And this will be what we talk about at our budget committee meeting, is more where the funding is, not necessarily the tasks. So as the policy board, the funding we'll be reviewing in detail, but the tasks might be something you want to review a little bit more to just see if there's anything you want us to focus more on or less on that isn't federally required. And I'll just say for everyone who looks at our budget, we have a beginning working capital and a City of Bend loan, and those actually cancel each other out. So that's just something where we just need that at the end of the year and the beginning as we are on a reimbursement schedule. But it's not, I guess, it's not something where we have those funds available. They're just to make sure that we don't close our year out on a deficit.
Yeah, I think Eric Baird talked to that
Just a little bit, yeah.
His financial summary report.
Mm-hmm. So,
any questions so far?
I don't see any, Tyler.
All right. So I think we have, I guess, 2 more slides. So I think we've gone through this very, very quickly, but I think we're just wanting to know if you have time, we would ask that you at least skim our work program, and then let us know if there are things that you feel like we're missing, things that you would like us to potentially add into our work program, or if you just have questions about, why are you thinking about doing X, Y, or Z, please let us know.
Yeah. When you do look at the budget and when you do look at that work program online, the last couple pages are comments that we've received from Federal Highway, Federal Transit, and our ODOT partners. So maybe that may help you see what they're looking for as we progress. And then we'll have a final work program coming up, and we'll see that on the next slide, but that'll be something where we have another public comment opportunity so others can comment as well.
And so this is our last slide for the work program and budget. This just lays out kind of our schedule. As you can see, we've taken the draft to the technical committee. We had our a review with ODOT and our federal partners last week. We're walking through it quickly with you today. We will be scheduling our budget committee meeting for late March, probably the last week of March. And then bringing a revised version to you, and then hopefully getting your review and adoption in April. And with that, that's all I have. Do you have any questions of us?
Any questions? That's a lot of information. Thank
It
you so much. I will say for myself over the years, we are weird that we are a single city MPO, but for sure it means we have 2.8 planners that are available to help the work of the city and help the work of the county and ODOT. So thank you so much. That looks great and interesting. And anyone with any further questions, as you said, can email or we can discuss in a different meeting.
I think
believe that,
Phil may have had a question.
please.
I did think of one question. At the beginning of this agenda item, you described how the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration are key funding sources for MPO work. I'm wondering about how the fund, on the federal end, how the funds work for those pots of money. Like, are those annual appropriations? And if so, I'm wondering if the MPO or the city or the county should be submitting, appropriations kind of requests to our congressional delegation on an annual basis.
I think for the operating funding that we receive, that's through, I think, typically through an annual appropriations process. But the way those MPO dollars work, they come to each state DOT in a lump sum. And then the state DOT is charged with allocating them to, the MPOs within their state, within their boundary. And so we have an agreement. We worked out we, the MPOs staff, we went through a pretty lengthy process several years ago to come up with a process for ODOT to allocate those funds or distribute those funds among the state's 8 MPOs. One of the things that we are pushing for is to have ODOT update that formula for the way those funds are distributed. And I think, with our goal ultimately is that we could get a little bit more funding, for the Bend area and the work that we do. But that's something that we will be asking ODOT to hopefully take on in the next year or two. And then the discretionary STBG funding, again, that's something that's done on an annual, typically comes out of the annual appropriations process in Congress. And the distribution of those funds to us ultimately comes through, there's an agreement that ODOT has with the League of Oregon Cities and the Association of Oregon Counties. And that agreement lays out the process for allocating those funds to cities, counties, and the state's small MPOs, which we are one of. And so there's a differentiation between MPOs. If the population's over 200,000, you're in a different category than we are. And those the 3 large MPOs in the state, Eugene, Salem, and the Portland areas, they actually get their funding directly from the federal government. Those STBG come directly to them. For us, it goes through ODOT, through that LOC AOC agreement. And so we get an announcement typically in January of each year telling us how much we're going to get. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's how the funds are distributed or come to us ultimately.
Yeah, that partly answers my question. I guess I'm wondering whether the amount that gets allocated from the federal government to the state, whether that can be increased, like whether there's appropriations advocacy or something like that would increase the overall size of the pie that we get our formula allocated slice of.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's something that I think collectively the MPO should be tackling, because after the 10-year census, that's when new MPOs get identified. And I know in the past, like after the 2010 census, there were, 40 new MPOs popped up around the country or something. And yet the amount of funding that was available for MPOs nationwide didn't change. And so, it just meant that everybody got a slightly smaller slice of the pie. after that process. And that's been an ongoing issue and discussion item, not only in Oregon, but just nationwide. And I think having some advocacy on that would be, from our perspective, would be a nice thing.
So maybe that's something we can discuss with the state consortium when we meet together.
Yeah, I was gonna say that would be a good topic for OMPOC, though, the consortium.
The one issue, or the one, the time sensitive thing is that I know that our congressional offices are doing their appropriations outreach right now. So, basically they reach out to communities, ask them, what are the federal programs that are most important and most useful to you? And, tell us how you use them, tell us how much more money you make requests to plus up certain accounts and certain line items. And, theoretically, the way that this works is, people submit appropriations requests, February, March, maybe into April. And then that ideally is supposed to translate into increased funding in certain programs when the federal government releases its budget, for the next fiscal year, starting October 1st. Now, Congress hasn't been able to release a budget before the fiscal year starts for a number of years, but maybe this will be the first year, in a while when that happens. And so I guess if we is there someone who kind of chairs the consortium or something that we could ask about this, because this really is the right time to do the appropriations advocacy if we want to affect the budget, for the fiscal year that starts on October 1st.
There is, and I think, I can't remember, Barb, who it is right now, but we can get that info to you, Commissioner.
Great, thanks.
That's an excellent suggestion, Phil. We'll work on that.
Yeah, and I'd be happy, I'd be happy to talk through this stuff with who I know a little bit about the appropriations process.
Yes, you do. That's great. Thank you. Do you feel like, Phil, what your next step is going to be? Our next steps are going to be?
The two things would be, number one, are the funding programs that provide funds to the MPO, are those things that are subject to annual appropriations, or is it some kind of weird federal formula thing where tied to gas taxes or something like that? Is it an appropriation line item, or is it some other kind of money? And then two, just knowing who the right person is at the MPO consortium, the Oregon MPO consortium, to coordinate with, to inquire about whether we're already doing that kind of advocacy or not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can look into that and help, get you some answers and then hopefully provide you a little bit of direction.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Tyler. Excellent. All right, agenda item number 10 is the Parkway Plan alternate mobility targets. Rick Williams, looks like you're going to take us through this item.
Thank you. I'll give it my best shot here. Alternative mobility targets are the last part of the Parkway Plan that we need to complete before taking it to City Council, which I'll be doing tomorrow night at a work session, and then on to the OTC for adoption of the Parkway Plan. Alternative mobility targets, it's a bit wonky, but here's my best shot at it for you. We need to have consistency between different planning efforts. And in this case, the city of Bend has their comprehensive plan that lays out where and how you plan to grow over time. You have that development pressure on one side. On the other side, the Oregon Highway Plan sets a measurement. It's called a volume to capacity ratio for highway segments and intersections to include ramp terminals. So it's basically what's the capacity of that segment of roadway versus how many people are trying to use it. And that number is, for most locations, it's a 0.85. So it's basically you have 15% reserve capacity built into the roadway segment. Well, in the case of Bend, with all the projects that are in the Parkway Plan and all the projects that are in the City of Bend's TSP, the modeling shows that we still have a handful of intersections and ramp terminals that will be higher than that 0.85, the volume capacity ratio. So what the state does is we modify that ratio, raise it from a 0.85 to something realistic, which shows how that intersection is going to operate. So, this slide outlines it a little bit, but it can still be a little bit vague. But what I want to draw your attention to is that bullet number 3, because there's another part of state administrative rule called the transportation planning rule. And in short, it basically says development needs to pay for its impacts to the transportation system. So I will give an example. If you think of the Parkway and Reed Market, our modeling shows that the southbound off-ramp, despite all the projects from the Parkway Plan and all the projects from the TSP, will not meet the volume to capacity ratio. So if there's a large development happening in Bend, let's say one of the urban growth boundary expansion areas, if they push traffic into that intersection that's already above that 0.85, they would have to mitigate further impacts to get that back down to 0.85, which might mean building a transportation project, or in some cases, paying money directly to ODOT for a future project to bring it back down. The alternative mobility targets, what we do is we raise that volume to capacity ratio. And whoever's running the slides, can you go to the next slide, please? This shows the locations that I'm talking about. Again, using Reed Market as an example, and I'm sorry those dots are very, very small. But we raised it from if I can read this correctly, green dot, it would go from a 0.85 to a 0.90. That means when development happens, they don't have to mitigate back down to 0.85, they have to mitigate down to 0.90. That means less of investment in that intersection, but it also means that we're basically accepting more congestion before we require something to happen at that location. I told you this was wonky, and I'm trying not to lose everybody on it, but it's a requirement to make sure the plans all match up. The bottom line is it allows development, the planned development within the city that you've agreed on in your comp plan, to continue on without basically having a de facto moratorium on development, because some improvements could be so expensive that development could not afford to mitigate for it. It's not the case here, but in Beaverton a few years ago, they had a massive expansion of the UGB. And one of the developments actually required the construction of a new interchange on the highway. So you could hopefully understand that if somebody said, well, we want to build 2,000 new homes, and it's going to impact the highway to a certain location, and we say, yes, and you have to build us a $30 million interchange under the transportation planning rule, that would probably stifle that development from happening. So this is basically ODOT changing the Oregon Highway Plan to reflect what the city of Bend is going to do in their comp plan. You will not see any difference on the actual highway. You won't see any more congestion than we already think is going to happen at that location. But since we're higher than those magic numbers of 0.85, we have to come up with these alternative mobility targets. Did I make that about as complicated as possible? I'll take questions, but it's not an easy thing to actually understand. On the map, you can see, if you can read the small legend at the bottom, you can see where we're changing the alternative mobility targets and what they're being changed to. So the greens are the going from 0.85 to 0.90, and then the things that are in kind of that reddish orange are going from a 0.85 to a 0.98, if I can read that correctly, or 0.99.
Hey, Rick.
Can't go higher than 0.1.0 because that's complete saturation.
Hey, Rick, I think one thing that always helps when you explain this is just the counterpoint to that. Why wouldn't we always make adjustments to the alternative mobility targets? What's the balance? I think that's always helpful for a group to understand why we don't do this all the time.
Well, it has to do with, and thanks for bringing that up, Bob. It has to do with investment, where we're going to spend the money. And as Tyler's pointed out in the past, and anybody who worked through the TSP process, there's money coming from the city already in the bond to some of these ODOT projects. And then ODOT also puts money towards local projects. So we try to keep it at the 0.85 because that's normal operation. And you want to try to maintain that excess capacity for future growth in the area. That's why you have the projects in the TSP that reflect state highway projects. But at the same time, it just allows development to continue to happen, and it changes how ODOT will invest in these locations. Bob, I'd probably danced around it again because this is a difficult thing to explain in some ways. Do you have any points you'd like to add for clarification?
No, I think you captured it. I mean, this isn't the norm, right? There's a balance that needs to be made between emphasizing development and allowing a community to grow, but maintaining, the status quo of traffic conditions. And so it's not something we take lightly by adjusting this, because the counterpoint to that is now we're losing potential development money. But if we're so restrictive, then there's no development at all, and we're limiting that as well. So I think it just is a balance. And we're always sensitive around these topics because we get asked a lot to change mobility targets, and a lot of times we say no, but in this case it makes sense.
Thank you, Bob. Commissioner?
So when you dial up these ratios like this, is that kind of, do you think of that as permanent? It's thing like, or is it, we're allowing more congestion in the near term to allow, so that we don't place this disproportionate burden on like whatever development happens to land at that golden moment. But then later on, we will do things to bring the ratio back down, to add capacity back, when we can find like a large chunk of federal infrastructure funding or something like that. I guess, do these, when you go up to 0.9 or 0.95 or whatever, is that just considered, that's permanently going to be operate, that interchange will permanently be at that level of congestion? Or are you intending to just allow some development now and build, get that capacity back through upgrades at some future point?
The most direct answer is it's permanent. Because what you're doing, you're amending the Oregon Highway Plan. So if you get in the back of that planning document, it sets those volume to capacity ratios. And then it has a little spreadsheet of exceptions, very specific locations around the state where there are exceptions. So using Reed Market as an example again. So if Reed Market is going to be set at moving from 0.85 to 0.90, in the future, when we have money available to make improvements at that location, we'd be making the improvements to get it back down to a 0.90 instead of a 0.85 because we've amended the plan. So in the future, it does change that. But again, a lot of this is going to be the peak hour congestion. Most of the modeling we've seen, the locations are marked on the map. In the near term, that you could see that congestion for an hour. By 20 years from now, you might see that level of congestion for an hour and a half or 2 hours. One way to kind of look at it is, and Tyler, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that if you look in August on a Friday at 5 o'clock in the middle of our peak tourism season, that's when you're going to see these types of numbers. You're already seeing the congestion, but as you picked up on, Phil, this has to do with when we do spend money in the future, what we're trying to get it back down to, and we are permanently changing that to that slightly higher number.
The other point here, or excuse me, Commissioner, just to add in is we want to get to a 0.85 in the future. I mean, that's our target, but realistically, and using Rick's Reed Market example, that means another east-west parallel route in Bend. It means significant improvements at Reed Market, well beyond any of if we spent all the bond on those projects alone, it still would not change. Mode shift is still our greatest opportunity to get back to a 0.85 or reduce. And with autonomous vehicles and how that plays in, that's going to be the significant conversation 10 years from now, not necessarily going back to shifting mobility targets again. Like Rick said, those will be permanent, but we'll still be addressing and hopefully tackling these other capacity issues from a non-capital standpoint. It's just not realistic to continue to build out solutions to these really significant problems that we have, not only in Bend, but across the state.
Can you give examples either locally or in other parts of the state, or other regions of the state where we've already done this, where we've already dialed up to 0.9 or 0.95?
We're doing it currently here in Bend and in Redmond, and this will both on Highway 97. And this is the first time we've done this in Region 4. It's already been done in Eugene, Springfield. Almost all the larger jurisdictions in the Portland metro area have had to have alternative mobility targets. And we're looking mostly here at just ramp terminals. We haven't looked, our modeling shows we don't have to do it for the main line of the highway. It's for the highways connecting to the local street system where we have the congestion and the delay. You can get in the Portland metro area and you have entire highway segments with alternative mobility targets. It's basically just a reflection of the growth, because if you noticed in Oregon, we do things a little bit differently. If this was the same situation in a state maybe like Texas or suburban Atlanta, you would be talking about adding more lanes to the highway system. We don't have both the resources, and under the state land use laws and our transportation rules, we don't approach it that way. We don't try to build ourselves out of congestion. And that's kind of a reflection of this.
I would say too, Commissioner, that alternate mobility targets, I think, are fairly common along parts of Highway 101 along the coast because of tourism, especially because of tourism related issues and just the peaking that happens on weekends and throughout the summer in a lot of the communities along the coast.
Thank you. I thought Bob kind of started talking about what I wanted to hear. So we had this issue come up within this city, and it's one of our city streets. The community has decided they are not expanding that street. They're not adding lanes. We've put in all the roundabouts that we could possibly put in, but we still have development coming in. And so my response was transit, that we don't have nothing. There's nothing we can do at that point. At that point, we can invest in transit in order to just plain, as you're saying, do that mode shift so that there are not as many cars on the road. Is there any universe where ODOT would invest in transit. Like, I see the look on your face there, Rick. I think that's not in my lifetime, counselor.
No. We actually have a whole transit division within ODOT, and and we work very closely with FTA to bring money into the area for projects through it's like CET's master plan. But that's again, the urban jurisdiction is the one working that, not as much ODOT's region office as far as like funding opportunities for a local street system.
Oh, no,
Bob,
no.
am I
so
making
sorry.
sense?
No, I
on
did
this?
not mean on our local street. I meant on Highway 97, So, we're saying that the cost to expand these interchanges is just too much. So my question is, well, how about transit? How about we try and get more people within the city of Bend, but for the purpose of relieving traffic at those spots where we're moving up to 0.99. Does that make sense?
I think, Councilor, we already do that, but not as far as like direct investment in the transit system, but more of like when you were doing the TSP of interacting and providing support for that. There's it's kind of like us signing on to say like, yes, this is a good thing, but at least from the regional standpoint, I don't believe we invest directly into transit.
I didn't think so either. Okay, but thank you. But you are looking, but again, what Bob said is that you are looking to mode shift in the future as the actual solution to these problems. Did I catch that correctly?
I don't know. It's just a comment. Let me speak to that one, Rick, if you will. And it's just, we are at such peaks on a lot of these areas. There's no way to build out from you can't make Reed Market a 5-lane section within our budget cycle. So mode shift is the only real difference maker as far as changing the VC ratios, and especially during peak hour trips. And some of when Tyler talked about the US 20 3rd Street review, we've already done some work. The biggest shift is just increasing ridership by even 4% changes numbers. It's amazing. But I think to your other point about what the city and what we do is, we don't have as much jurisdiction in the city of Bend, obviously, but when we review developments from outside the urban growth boundary, some of these resorts that come in, we tie mode shift to their transportation investments. It's not just a contribution to a capital improvement. It's how do they make sure there's on-site housing for workers, so they're minimizing transport? How do they, maintain a potential transit opportunity to minimize? So we tackle a lot of those things where we have jurisdiction. That's not to say that we don't use that within the city of Bend when we're doing TPR rule. That's just not been a methodology that we've used.
Thank you.
And I won't belabor this long, but there's one little nuance that I would like to throw in. When you look at our busiest travel times, it's during the summer months, and it's because, according to Visit Bend, we get between 2 and 3 million people visiting per year. And I know that Casey Berg's looked at this. I know that CET looks at it, but unfortunately, a lot of people, whether they fly in to Redmond and then they rent a car, or we're a destination close enough from California, neighboring states, that people drive in. So we want to see mode shift, but those 2 to 3 million visitors a year, we're not set up yet well for them to just use public transportation to get around to all the sites we want, because a lot of it's based on outdoor recreation, and you have to drive to get up to the mountains or out to the lakes or whatever the case may be. So it still will work, but our tourist influx makes Bend rather unique.
And when we say mode shift, just to clarify, we're certainly talking about mode shift, but it's bigger than that. It's, as Rick mentioned, it's always that peak hour. Well, if we can offset peak hour over 2 hours or 3 by shifting business start times, school start times, these big drivers, I mean, certainly that's another one. When we say mode shift, it's time shift as well. And that can be a big factor. And I only mention that as new members here. I think these are things that we're really going to want to talk about, especially as ODOT shifted its statewide funding priorities to a lot of non-highway bike ped transit facilities and some of these other areas that we haven't talked about in the past a lot, in addition to mode shift, but some of these nuances, especially when new industry comes to town. Those are going to be the way we make it. I mean, we see the cost of doing business now. We can't afford $30 million interchanges. We don't even get 10 million of flexible funding in Region 4 from the Columbia River to Klamath Falls. So we have to talk about these different improvements.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm looking at the clock. We are running out of time. How about this? If there are any further questions.
One question from David Amaton had a
Cameron?
comment maybe. David, are you available to?
Yeah, if you can hear me okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this might just be kind of beating some of the same drums that Rick and Bob mentioned, but I just, I want to just be really clear that, that there are a lot of projects, a lot of infrastructure investment projects in the Parkway Plan. And the alternative mobility targets reflect those projects being implemented. So we only look to alternative mobility targets when we say, here's all the money that we're going to spend, here's all the projects that we're going to do, and there's still just no way we can meet ODOT's standard mobility target. So we don't just jump to the alternative mobility targets lightly. And then just to reiterate in response to the commissioner's question about permanence, the expectation is that when we adopt alternative mobility targets, that those are the new mobility targets. As I said earlier, we still move ahead with making the investments that are planned and identified. But for future investments, the expectation is that we are not making investments with the goal of hitting the 0.85 VC target. We are planning and making investments with the goal of hitting that new alternative mobility target. And then the last point I wanted to make is that, and hopefully this will be less dry than what's in the actual highway plan, but we don't just go to alternative mobility targets because we can't hit the mobility target. We also do it, and in fact, I would say we only do it when that alternative mobility target is also aligned with community goals. So in this situation, assuming we did have the funds to do it, sure, we could build out a wider 97 corridor, and we could build out full interchanges at each of the existing interchange and intersection locations. But and we would probably meet mobility targets if we did that, but we would create a corridor that a lot of people in Bend would not want to live near or adjacent to, and a lot of people would not want to visit. Because they have places like Texas where they can go to if they want to enjoy that type of environment. So thanks, Ovi.
Thanks, David.
Any other questions for today? I think this is a really interesting topic and requires a lot of crystal balls to try and figure out how are people going to be moving around in the future. And so thank you very much. Now we've got another opportunity for public comment. If there's anyone that I saw a hand, where was that?
Robin Bora has a comment.
Robin, go ahead.
Hey, thank you. I'm a former MPO board member, Robin Vora in Bend. And I just thought I'd listen in to see what you guys are all talking about. And it's been interesting. This last discussion on mobility targets, I just can't help but, I guess, pardon me, Rick, but for repeating what I've, suggested before is that ODOT not close the short ins and outs on the parkway because they help distribute some of the parkway traffic. And, if we do that, it's just going to increase traffic on city streets, and traffic will eventually back up at some of those intersections you were talking about. I mean, Reed Market and Revere, you don't want traffic coming all the way out onto the parkway trying to get out at those intersections. And I agree with what was said about changing the mode. I mean, it'd be great to someday see a regional rail system that feeds all this. And I think in the long term, congestion pricing, ODOT, I know shying away from it, trying it in Portland, I think, but it would be a good idea to look at it to try and reduce the traffic on the parkway. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Any other public comment? I don't see any hands. Our
don't see
next sorry, Hobie, were you saying something?
Nope, nothing.
The next policy board meeting is a special meeting on February 23rd from 11:30 to 1 o'clock. And that will be focused on the 97 Baker Road Interchange Area Management Plan. And then after that will be our regular policy board meeting, which will be on March 16th from 11:30 till 1 o'clock. And I think that means we can be adjourned. Yeah, move to adjourn.
Thanks so
We're
much.
adjourned. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Have a nice day. Enjoy the sun.
You too.